All right, David Freiheit, aka Viva Fry, former litigator turned YouTuber turned aspiring politician. What's up? What's up with that? That's a pretty long title there.
Well, and the funny thing is, the irony is that I went from what I consider to be a relatively toxic environment of commercial litigation, the practice of law. I said I didn't like it, did it for 13 years, got to know it. I said I'm going to leave this, go into YouTube. Fortunate enough to have built up something of a sustainable YouTube channel community. And then over the last 2 years, saw what I believed to be a free and democratic society crumble to what we are currently living through, which I do not believe is indicative or representative of a free and democratic society. So I said, I'm going to throw myself into the toxic environment of politics and run for office. So
back to the toxic environment.
It's a big, beautiful circle, but we'll see what happens. Yeah, no, I told Maxime Bernier when I discussed with him as to running with the party, I said, you have to let me run on this, the truth of it, which is I never wanted to be here. And but for the forces of the world, I would not be here. I would rather be making videos in my car, which I still plan on doing. But I had no choice but to actually stand up and at some point say, complaining on YouTube is one thing. I raise awareness and it's great, but I need to step into the political field and try to make a difference because I don't like the way I see things going in Canada.
See, that's what I look, because I follow your channel. I mean, we have a common friend. I discovered your channel through Pantelis, a common friend of ours. So I started following you, and I think it's an interesting channel. It's very informative. And when you announced on your channel that you were running for office, I thought two things. I thought, okay, finally, someone that has the courage to put his money where his mouth is, because there's a lot of political commentary on the channel, and it's good. It's informative. There's no, and what I love about the channel is that you're fairly unbiased. Okay, I mean, you do kind of sneak in your opinion here and there, which is fine. It's normal. But I thought, you know what? After all that commentary and all that, all that content on politics, finally, there you go. Someone that has the courage to do that and say, you know what, let me run. And secondly, what I thought, you know what, maybe this experience is gonna make him better understand, what it takes to do the job. Because and you're very critical of the politicians once they're there and how they do their job, and it's fine, it's your opinion, but the work and the sacrifice it takes to actually make it there is something very few people actually know, and obviously much less get to experience. So,
and here I am sensitive to the fact that it's very easy to play Monday morning quarterback and just look and criticize everything the government does. Take Biden right now with the crisis in Afghanistan. It's very easy for everyone to sit back and say, it went wrong, this is why it went wrong, and this is what you should have done, knowing how it went wrong. But then there's also just the reasonable, objective, viewing things, which is, I don't care how hard the job is. If you can't do it, don't do it. And if you're doing it badly, I don't care if you're conservative, liberal, or whatever, you're going to get called out. You're going to get criticized for it, because that's what it means to be, a public figure. That's what it means to be a politician. And that's the only way you actually learn and correct your mistakes. The problem in politics is nobody wants to correct their mistakes because that's a sign of weakness. So they double down on the mistake. And I think that's a fundamental paradigm that we have to drop in politics. Apologizing or correcting a mistake is not a sign of weakness, but politicians don't seem to want to do that. As relates to what it takes to get there, it's a filthy industry. It's a filthy, backstabbing, conniving, dishonest industry. And you see what politicians have to do to get to where they're at. It's not always clean and it's not always fair. But I may very well lose on that because I'm not willing to do certain things just to gain power. People might think I'm weak for it, but there's no point becoming the monster when you're trying to slay the monster, to quote Nietzsche, I hope.
Mind you, because I saw a video that you put up the other day, and having organized a lot of campaigns and having run a campaign myself, I'm still trying to figure out how in the middle of a campaign you still find time to water ski.
Well, so I'm at my parents' cottage, and the kids, I'm a ball of stress. So the moments where I can de-stress, I can't. But I'm sitting here doing this, doing my the YouTube thing, and then I got kids here, so I jump out in the boat. But I'm going to thank my brother, my sister who are in from out of town, my parents who are watching the kids, my kids, and the other kids. But I gotta still, you gotta be a parent at the end of the day, because I didn't bring kids into this world so that someone else can raise them.
But that's the tough part about politics as well, right? And I mean, eventually, if you pursue this, I think it's something that you're going to understand the amount of sacrifice that goes into this, the things that you have to put aside because you have to give yourself. I mean, that's the contract that you make, right? You give yourself to the people that you want to represent. And it's not true that the people that you're going to represent eventually necessarily support you. And that's the crazy thing about doing politics, that the minute you're there, you have to represent the 50,000, or in federal, it's whatever, 80 or 90,000 constituents. It's a mysterious world to work in.
Well, so this was part of my revelation. I made a video on it, my thoughts, my retrospective of having gone door to door and talked to, I got 100 signatures. We actually got a few more because I had a friend get some more insurance signatures, but I got over 100 myself. And I to get 100, you got to talk to 150 people, because there are a lot of people who, even after you talk to, they don't even want to endorse you to get on the ballot, even though it doesn't mean supporting you as a candidate. But I understand that. I talk to these people, and you realize we're in a political climate now where people don't appreciate that you, on the one hand, have to represent the people who didn't vote for you, and you still have to represent and find a way of reflecting the interests of those who don't agree with you. Yeah. Now, people don't think it's possible, but by and large it is. But it starts just with listening first. And you can say, look, I've heard you. I know your concerns. At the end of the day, we have to make a decision one way or the other. But, the way Justin Trudeau's doing it and saying, we live in a free and democratic society, and you're free to not get vaccinated, but if you don't, you're not getting on a plane or a train. Well, that's not exactly listening to your constituents who don't agree with you. That is basically just, majority rule, or at the very least, government rule. There's a way to do it depending on the issue. I think politics and politicians have sort of lost that. They've lost that technique. They've lost the incentive, because by and large, your base, we live in a world now where, they don't want to see compromise. They don't want to see people actually paying attention to the interests of the people who don't think like them. They want the victory. But I think it's something that has to change in politics. Maybe it can't, and then maybe I'm just doomed to be the nice guy who fails in his political run. But I would like to try to strike that middle ground and actually make people understand. Doesn't matter if we agree or disagree. A government should represent everybody fairly and honestly.
Right. So tell me now. This is a big, we spoke about that just before when we started. Obviously, it's a big decision. I'd like to understand. I mean, what was that driving force that told you, look, this is what you need to do now? Like, this is, regardless of what you said, and the fact that you're wearing shirts that say, politics ruins everything and all that kind of stuff, you have no other choice. Like, what was it that told you, David, this is it?
It was my kids wearing masks outside in the middle of summer at school. And I said, if I were single or if I had no kids, my decision would be much easier. And it might be I would call it a selfish decision. It might just be to up and leave, because I don't like the way things are going here. But I have kids here who are, going into high school, in elementary school, who have friends. We have our roots here. You can't just up and leave when you have kids, because it's, it might be nice for you, but it's not fair to the kids, to the foundations that we've established of family and friends here. And I said, before I make the ultimate decision to actually leave a place that I think has gone too far south in a direction that I don't want to go, I'm going to have to make the run for it. And I'm sitting around, I make the videos complaining or criticizing some of these measures, these lockdown measures, mask mandates, curfews. I've made videos explaining how I think it's fundamentally unconstitutional to forcibly detain incoming travelers in government facilities. And at some point, complaining is good. And I say, complaining will sensitize people to the problem. But I, from a personal perspective, said, okay, I'm miserable seeing what my country's becoming. I have two choices: run from the country or run for the country. And I say, I'll run for the country before I run from the country. And if people don't want to change, and if this is the Canada people want, I will then reassess my future here based on what the will of the people are going to show next election. But I could not just sit idly by and make YouTube videos about it anymore. I have to try to change the future that I see shaping for my children, for their friends. Yeah, I find it deeply distressing to see what world in Canada my kids and my kids' friends are growing up in. And I'll try to change it if I can. And if I can't, and if it doesn't want to be changed, then we'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting because, and obviously you're a lawyer, so you know this much better than I do. What what part of the Constitution? Because clearly, I mean, anyone can argue that our fundamental rights and freedoms have been taken away from us, right? And it's not only at the federal level, we're seeing things at the provincial level as well. There is a certain degree of improvisation that we've seen, where in the beginning, even Justin Trudeau was saying that mandatory vaccinations won't be considered, and suddenly they are.
I need to find those two audios to juxtapose them. But yeah, he said this is not a Canada in which we live.
Yeah, it's out there. Actually, I saw that. But even provincially, restricting people's access to businesses, or even just closing down businesses altogether.
It's deprivation of property. I mean, people. I had this interaction with someone on Twitter, and I was saying this is unconstitutional. This is tyrannical in a way. And they say, oh, it's not like you're being locked up, or you're not having property taken away from you. And it's like, no. When someone says that you can't travel outside of your house after 8 o'clock, you're having property taken from you. When you can't travel to properties, I don't own more than one house, but people who have cottages in Ontario and outside, when you can't go to your own properties, you're being deprived of your own property. You're being deprived of your liberty, mobility rights. They're all in there. They're all in the Canadian Charter. You're being deprived of them, and no one batted an eyelash. Some people did, but.
So what does the law say? Like, are there provisions constitutionally where the government can withhold these fundamental rights given an emergency? And is this an emergency? Can it be defined?
So you have there's a few provisions of law. The first thing is, and everybody should know this, and now we fully appreciated it, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms has the first section, which says, here are your rights and freedoms that can only be limited in as much as can be justified in a free and democratic society. I got a lot of American subs, and they basically say, good, you have no rights, you just have privileges, and the government can take them away whenever they want. And we're living through that right now. And I think a lot of people might be more sensitive to that reductio than they were 2 years ago. But many rights in the Charter are subject to Section 1, which says they can be infringed in as much as it's justified in a free and democratic society. Then you have your notwithstanding clause, which says the government can infringe on your rights if on one of your charter rights, some but not all, doesn't matter which ones you can't, allegedly, to the extent that they specify it in the law, make it clear that the law is infringing on your constitutional rights. That can only last 5 years. And the idea being, if you want to vote out a government that violates your constitutional rights in a law, that's your opportunity to do so. But it becomes sufficiently clear to most people, I think most Canadians, the government views them as privileges, and François Legault has said as much. And if what can justify limiting your mobility rights, your right against forcible detention, is the prospect that if you're incoming on a plane, you might in fact be carrying COVID, even though you tested negative, and you can test positive for up to 2 weeks, that infinitesimal risk, if that's enough to justify forced detention in a government facility under Section 1 of the Charter, I think we can agree that we don't have very many rights that cannot be infringed upon willy-nilly as soon as the courts or the government say there is some risk, however minimal.
I think this came and hit everyone. We can't really say by surprise, because chaos was ensuing in China months before it came here. I think reasonably anyone could have predicted that perhaps it may come here. I don't know why they didn't. But let's just assume that this dropped on everyone as a huge surprise. They didn't see it coming, and they had to take these measures. What would you have done in order to, quote unquote, protect the people other than the measures that were put in place? All
right. So first thing, just to explain what just happened here, I don't want this thing making too much noise during the broadcast. So thank you. Yeah. Again, easy to play Monday morning quarterback. Hindsight is 2020. And I said this relatively early on, like once it became clear that it was not going to be 2 weeks to flatten the curve, then it became the question is, what should we do? And we had enough numbers, we had enough stats relatively early on. We knew where the deaths were occurring, and it was long-term healthcare facilities. And the lockdowns did nothing to help that. It probably only exacerbated the problem. But we knew enough in the beginning to make a decision more along the lines of what Sweden made as a decision, which is we're going to protect the vulnerable, but we're going to let those who are minimally at risk of adverse effects live in freedom and continue to support the infrastructure that we need to actually protect the vulnerable. And it's like it's the insanity of what actually occurred is everything that the government did exacerbated the problem in that you ended up lacking staff at these long-term healthcare facilities to the point where infected staff were going from one facility to the next, spreading the virus among those who are already the most vulnerable. And you say, we knew the chaos was coming. We knew the chaos was coming. At least the government did. And what does the government do? Well, they donate, a substantial amount of PPE, the personal protective equipment, to China in February. Their argument is that the PPE was nearing an expiry date, but it's not exactly like face masks disintegrate or grow mold after they hit their expiry date. And after having done this, knowing what was coming, knowing the inherent problems with long-term healthcare and the healthcare system in general, give away PPE, leave the LTHCs totally vulnerable, which is where most of the deaths occur. I mean, at some point, it's not a question of just finding fault for the sake of finding fault. It's logical problems and logical responses were lacking. And what I would have done differently? Exactly that. You protect the vulnerable, protect those who are sufficiently scared that they don't want to go out, and you let everyone else live free. Take reasonable precautions. Washing your hands is something I did before COVID, but you let those go out and support the very infrastructure that you need to protect those who are vulnerable. Instead, we flattened the curve all right. We leveled society and we left the most vulnerable to die, not just from COVID, but from actual malnourishment, dehydration, and neglect in the long-term healthcare facilities.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about your party. Was that a choice made because there wasn't any other choice available to make, or was it really something where that you were aligned with in terms of the ideology and the platform?
So it's an interesting thing. It was not the lesser of the evils. I don't want anyone thinking I settled for the PPC. It just became clear to me that the PPC, People's Party of Canada, Parti Populaire de Canada, it's the only party that seems to have the slightest bit of common sense when it comes to governance. People have a misconception of the PPC, I will say, largely because of slanderous media from a media that is sponsored to the tune of $1 billion a year by the federal government and goes out of its way to sue the Conservatives for copyright infringement and demonize the PPC for totally baseless accusations. There's a story there, but we don't need to get into it, about Kinsella having a contract with the Conservatives to create fake Facebook posts, racist ones, to then pay another think tank to find those posts and say the PPC is racist. Setting that parentheses aside, I knew what I thought of the PPC in 2018 because I am nonetheless vulnerable to media nonetheless. And over the course of the last 2 years, with my channel, with PPC followers who are in the chat, and with reading the PPC's own platform, I see, okay, they want to have stricter immigration policies so that we can take care of Canadian issues first. And take care of Canadian issues, not just for white Canadians. There are plenty of immigrants in Canada. There are plenty of minorities in Canada that we should be taking care of first before, pulling a Trudeau and just wanting to bring in the rest of the world while neglecting our own. So it was common sense platform policy, but it was really mostly with the COVID that I said, who's fighting for our constitutional rights here? The Conservatives, when it comes to free speech and that infamous Bill C-10, say, yeah, if we're elected, we'll repeal Bill C-10. And I tweeted to O'Toole, like, hey, that's nice. How about you just fight against it being implemented now instead of saying we're going to let it pass and then fight it when it's there? Right. The Conservatives are for the carbon tax without really even questioning the efficacy of such a measure. They're not fighting against the lockdowns. And I look at the PPC, these acronyms are a little tricky, but I look at the People's Party of Canada and I say, the immigration policy, far from being xenophobic or racist, is actually quite logical, and it means taking care of our own Indigenous communities, for example, before worrying about the rest of the world. And it's not selfish; it's common sense. You're the Prime Minister of Canada. You're not the leader of the UN, and everyone has different interests. But and I saw what they had on, fighting for the constitutional rights, anti-lockdowns. And I said it's the only party that actually has any sort of common sense in terms of governance. And they'll have my vote, but now they have my candidacy.
So obviously it's not a very popular party. And like you said, it's often neglected by the media, obviously, therefore getting very little visibility. What's people's reaction when you announce yourself to them? I mean,
well,
it's like, what do you believe that this party, why do you believe it's viewed so negatively?
Well, I believe it's viewed negatively, in large part because of inaccurate media coverage and outright slander, libel, and demonizing.
Mm-hmm.
I remember 2018. I remember they were calling Maxime Bernier racist, xenophobic. There was a candidate out of Nova Scotia who did put out what I think is a tweet you don't put out about Islam. I say you don't tweet that. Those are wrong tweets in message and in tone. But then to go on from there and say, because you had one candidate out in Nova Scotia who put out a tweet, Maxime Bernier and the entire party is racist. I mean, let's follow that logic. Every liberal in Canada, therefore, is racist, is corrupt, is unethical. If it's true for Justin Trudeau, it's true for the entire party, and even more so than one candidate out in somewhere that tweets something that you have no control over. I remember what the media said, and I remember what I thought, because I can be a victim to this as well. And it was only in looking into it and actually getting to know the people and the party. They say there's nothing racist about this party. It probably has a more diverse candidate range than the other parties, if diversity is a sign of anything. They are probably more pro-choice on meaningful issues than the Liberals. They're pro-choice not just on the fundamental women's issues, they're pro-choice on the vaccine issues, they're pro-choice on the individual issues. So they're not racist and they're not anything, but the media does a good job. That, whenever they throw that accusation out there, it leaves a smell, and it's they know it, we know it. That's how the media works. But they've been demonized by the media. There's no question about it. The reaction, when I was going door to door, everyone, I said, the same shtick for everybody. It's like, okay, they declare the election, I'm running, and I see people smile. Oh, good initiative. And I say, I'm running with the PPC. And literally people would they take a step back. It was like I just told them,
you killed their dog.
It was like I was waiting for them to ask me where my horns were. Like, you don't look evil. My goodness, I've known you for years. You live in the neighborhood. You have the best house for Halloween. You don't look like a racist xenophobe. And I was like, this is literally the way people's impressions and initial impressions work. And then in discussing it with them, they begin to realize, I think they begin to realize that they might have demonized people in their own minds. I had one person say, I'm not demonizing the party. They're just anti-vaxxers and racists. And I was like, A, that's demonizing, and B, that's inaccurate. The party is not anti-vaxxer. No one in the party is anti-vaxxer. There is a world of difference between being anti-vaccine passport and anti-vaxxer. I mean, Maxime Bernier says he's not anti-vaxxer. He just made the decision not to get the vaccine. Whether or not anyone thinks he should get it, it's his choice. I've been double vaccinated for my own reasons, which some people are free to disagree with. And me and Maxime do not have an issue with each other's respective decisions to do what we've done. But we are against a vaccine passport, which is, the government coercing you into a medical procedure with an emergency authorization use, non-FDA approved, experimental vaccine according to the NIH itself. But people consider that to be anti-vax. And I was talking with one person who I went door to door to, and he didn't want to sign the paper because he couldn't endorse me to even run on the ballot if I were running for the PPC.
But they do understand that a signature on your nomination slip doesn't necessarily mean that they're supporting you, right?
People didn't even want to see people didn't even want to support me getting out there for people to see. Yeah. At one point I said to someone, I was like, if you hate the party so much and we're such a bunch of radical nutcases, you want us on the ballot and you want us to get embarrassed. If we have bad ideas, you want people to tell us our ideas are bad. That was one shtick. It didn't work all the time, but no, with one person, he says, well, you guys are anti-vaxxers. I said, no, we're not. We just believe that everybody should be allowed to make their own personal decision on these issues, and that there shouldn't be a vaccine passport. And he says, well, I'm not pro-vax passport either. I said, well, you say that publicly, you're going to get demonized in the exact same way that I have been demonized as being allegedly anti-vaxxer, despite being double vaccinated. I just support a person's choice. So that's the reaction. And I said, my number one goal in all of this is to sensitize Canada to the fact that the PPC is nothing of what the media has been saying it is for the last 2 or 3 years. I think people are starting to learn that. And I think the more they hear Justin Trudeau talking about how the unvaccinated are not going to get to ride on buses and planes and trains and automobiles, they might start realizing who the intolerants are in this election and who the radicals truly are in this election.
Yeah. I mean, look, he's going into this race with an advantage if we're looking at the polls, obviously. But then you see what happened in the election in Nova Scotia, where the outgoing government was 25 points ahead, something like that, and the Conservatives just won Nova Scotia primarily because of the government's position and policies related around COVID. So I'm seeing videos going around now where people are booing Justin Trudeau, and I'm not so sure that the people are 100% on the same page. And I know that he's trying very hard to put, to make COVID-19 about the ballot question, where he's going to separate himself from the other parties. Look, I don't know how that's going to turn around.
I don't believe the polls, and it's not because I'm a conspiracy guy. I know how polling works. It's garbage. The polling is garbage. And I know, as a pure matter of fact, you can poll to get the results that you want, depending on how you frame the question, depending on how you lead the question, and depending on whether or not you're a polling agency who is going to deliberately conduct the poll in a manner to achieve certain results. I did a live stream with a guy named Richard Barris with Robert Barnes. It was one of our sidebars. And Richard Barris is a pollster out of the United States. Very smart guy. Got it right with Trump, both elections. Mm-hmm. When you appreciate that some of these polls, these national polls that they use to say that the conservatives are at whatever points ahead or down, they're talking about having called hundreds of people, not thousands, not tens of thousands, hundreds of people through means which are antiquated to the point where you're not getting meaningful polls. I can go to Twitter and reach 300,000 people faster and get a more meaningful result than any of these polls. So I don't trust the polls at all, pretty much under any circumstances. I trust them to be wrong, and I trust them to be more designed to frame the narrative than to reflect reality. But I trust my own intuition, and I talk to a lot of people because I am talkative, I am open-minded, and I do have discussions with people who I still disagree with ultimately. And people have discussions with me who think that I'm, PPC, I must be right-wing nutcase. We still have discussions. And I have discussions with people who I know are left-wing, and they've had it. They've had it, they don't like it, and they're seeing what it's doing to their kids and to their kids' futures. And I think people are turning. I just think it's politically incorrect and it's politically dangerous to be vocal about it. I don't have a boss, I don't have sponsors, so I'm fortunate that I can say what I want. And, I'm not going to have any consequences at work, so to speak. Other people do not have that liberty. And so I guess in some way it's sort of a responsibility that I share the views that other people are not at liberty to express publicly for whatever the reason. Some people are just, timid, quiet, polite. Others don't want backlash from their employers, and others don't want social backlash. But I get the feeling that there are a lot of people, a very, very silent majority, who are exquisitely concerned and upset as to what's going on. They just don't vocalize it the same way I do.
Right. Well, we saw that happening in the States. People were surprised with Donald Trump winning that first election, and the main reason was that there was a silent majority that wasn't appearing in the polls, which is why Hillary Clinton was ahead. It is very possible. I mean, you guys are projecting that you're going to do better than what, a little under 2% that he got last election.
He got 1.5% last time, and right now the polls have him at 6%. Some have him at more than 6%, up 3%. Liberals seem to be down. Conservatives seem to be down. NDP seems to be the one picking up. Okay, I'll get me started on the NDP. One day I'm going to turn my sights on the NDP because they are, Jagmeet Singh and the NDP are almost as, now they're about just as intolerant as the liberals are. They cloak their intolerance in benevolence, like Jagmeet Singh with his anti-mask, right-wing, selfish extremist comments, and then lo and behold, he gets caught being a human. But the PPC seems to be doing very well. Polling. It's a new party. It's the second federal election, and they've been libeled and slandered more than most. I mean, more than the conservatives. But they're doing well. So we'll see. But I hope I'm right. There's a lot of people who are rightly peeved, who don't like the direction the country is turning, and who are looking at Australia and saying, this might be next for us. And it's all fun and games when I support the measures, and then it stops being fun and games when I'm blacklisted because my kid isn't double vaccinated, or I can't get into a coffee shop now because being fully vaxxed now means 2 shots and a booster, or 2 shots and 2 boosters, and everyone's fine until they start becoming the victim themselves. And so I'll stick my neck out there for those people before they get there. But I think a lot of people are starting to see it, and it's starting to get angry about it.
Let's talk about something that should be talked about more, and unfortunately we're not, which is the economy. And I think, like, in my entire previous career involved in politics, I think this is the first campaign that I'm following that the economy isn't in the top maybe 2 or 3 issues. And I mean, we know the ballooning deficits that we've been incurring since 2015 when Justin Trudeau went into government. The last week,
it'll balance itself. You know what balances itself? Bankruptcy. Bankruptcy balances itself.
The other day, the Bank of Canada came out and said our inflation rate is at 3.7. They're pointing at 3.4. Sorry, they're 3.7.
I think it was close to 4% last.
It was 3.7. They're projecting 3.9 by the third quarter. Obviously, they're pointing at the ballooning deficits as the main cause. Justin Trudeau was questioned the other day, and he said, "I don't really care about monetary policy. I care about the families." It's strange to see how you can care about the families but not mind the fact that their cost of living has just gone up. But I'm looking at your platform online. You have a plan on balancing the books within 2 years. Is it too ambitious, or is it possible to do that?
Okay, well, I don't know. Balancing it within 2 years as of when, I think, that plan, I don't know if it's realistic or unrealistic. I think with the deficit now, it becomes increasingly less and less realistic the further in debt we get. And, the more we have unemployment and the more we have massive inflation, let's just say it may or may not be too optimistic, but it may have also been the plan before we sunk not just the economy, but rather the country into a deficit that I don't know, it'll be difficult to get out of. But one thing that's obvious, first of all, we're not talking about the economy right now because we are running on fear and we're running on paranoia to distract from the actual more pressing issues. And I'm not saying this to be hyperbolic. We're literally, Trudeau, I shouldn't include me in that, is running on fear and paranoia of your fellow citizens. Focus on the issue of the unvaccinated as though that is the issue right now, and ignore the fact that we might be creating a deficit that we might never be able to get out of. We are creating labor shortages because lo and behold, the CERB benefits, I think, extend to either the day before or the day after the election. We're
extended till October, I think.
Yeah. So, even better. We've extended this CERB benefit now. It's going to be close to 2 years, and I'm seeing it. I talk to business owners. I'm seeing the effects of this, which is people can't find work. They can't find labor, I should say. It's not they can't find work. When I go downtown, there are signs up that says we're looking for work. I went to New Brunswick for a road trip. Same problems there. Stores are not able to remain open during regular hours because they don't have enough staff, because the staff that they had that were locked out of their jobs for the last year wanted to work. They found work. The people who don't want to work, or who are too fearful now to work, or who find it easier to accept these CERB benefits, not realizing you have to pay income tax on all of that, spoiler alert, are not looking for work. What happens? You have labor shortages, prices go up, and your money, your $2,000 that you're getting for CERB is not going to be worth $2,000 in real money. And you are putting into policies basically that are just exacerbating the issue, exacerbating the fundamental problems here, as opposed to making the hard decisions like DeSantis does in Florida, which is, we're going to cut the benefits. You're going to have to go back to work. You're going to have to live with the risks of COVID because you cannot live like this indefinitely. And like I said from the beginning, if there are people who are so traumatized they can't go back to work because they're fearful of contracting COVID, that's the demographic that you might have to look at in terms of subsidizing. I think it would be a very small minority, but the idea of just shutting down the whole Canadian economy and printing cash to subsidize them in the meantime, to pretend that that's a solution, is as naive as saying the budget's going to balance itself.
The gift and the curse of any new party that may potentially win this, assuming that the Liberals won't win, is that one, you're happy because you won and you're in government and you can implement your policies. The curse, however, is that you need to correct this economic situation, and you're going to have to do one of two things. You're going to either have to impose higher taxation, or you're going to have to start cutting everywhere where Justin Trudeau has given, and that's where you're going to be seen as the bad guy, right? It's like, oh no, you're cutting, you're taking away things, and that's the card that they're playing now in the election. I find the Liberal Party, where especially towards O'Toole, because that's their main adversary. He's going to take away your benefits, he's going to take away your services. He doesn't care about women's services, so they're already attacking on that front. At the same time, what else can you do?
Being a leader actually means making tough decisions and telling the people who are angry with your decisions, this is the way it has to be, not in the same sense as saying, being a leader and saying, if you're not vaccinated, you're not getting on a train or a bus. I mean, that's not, we're talking about two different decisions here. Yes, the government doesn't fund itself, and it cannot increase in size exponentially, indefinitely, without bankrupting itself. It's a matter of fact, unless the government gets into business, and hopefully businesses, money-making businesses other than arms dealing to foreign nations in order to subsidize their own existence. But yeah, the government has to be reduced in size. We have to privatize certain things which have just become federal institutions. And it is an uphill battle, because you're looking at people who are saying, you're coming after my livelihood as a federal employee. And this is like the vicious circle, or the Kafkaesque reality that you get when everyone becomes dependent on the government. Any discussion about reducing the size of government, and you have people saying, well, I rely on them for my existence, even though that reliance is itself not sustainable. It's an uphill battle. It's something that people are going to have to appreciate. But I think at some point, any small business owner is going to appreciate the argument that we need to reduce the size of the government, because anybody who's had to file the paperwork or go through the hoops of running a small business knows it's just too much. It almost exists just to finance itself through the fines and the taxes and the interest that you have to pay for not being able to account for all of this government infrastructure that's been created to regulate, control, etc. But yeah, look, it's not going to make us popular with the unions. It's not going to make us popular with federal employees. Some of them. It might make us more popular with the federal employees who don't want to get vaccinated and now are seeing themselves risk losing their jobs. Mm-hmm. But it is what it is. You, at some point, you can just promise people money. You can just keep handing out checks, and you're kicking the can down the road the way Justin Trudeau is. And you kick the can down the road until you live in nothing but a government state. And that, we've seen how that's panned out in other countries.
Let's wrap it up. What's your plan during this campaign? Are you meeting local leaders, local actors, different associations? Are you being, made aware of local challenges that you want to help with eventually if you get elected?
Well, so the immediate plan, I'm going to start doing what we call on the internet Ask Me Anythings, AMAs in certain areas, parks, cafes. People meet and greet, come and ask questions, and just lay out bare what it is that we're running on and what our beliefs are, to demystify it to people. I'm going to have focus groups, for lack of a better word. I've lived in Westmount my entire life, save and except when I was studying law in Quebec City and 1 year in Paris. I lived in NDG also for a couple of years. I'm going to meet with friends and connections to discuss what the issues are. And I'm not saying I know what the issues are. I just know we know what the big issues are right now. Kids going back to school, and business concerns of local businesses. How this translates into federal representation is going to be a much bigger issue to tackle. But I'm going to meet with local business interests, business groups, business owners, and I'm just going to go door to door. I'm going to go door to door after I've got my signatures, just to continue meeting people and seeing what their concerns are as individuals. I have an idea, but it is going to be a question of getting out there, shaking hands. And I have gone back to shaking hands. I just, I wash my hands more often, and hearing what people have to say, and just making sure that people know it's not just liberals and conservatives right now. And as far as I'm concerned, those are two feathers on the same bird, to make up my own metaphor. As far as I'm concerned, there's no real difference between the conservatives and the liberals. It's going to be a question of hearing what people have to say, and also just convincing them, making them realize that what they thought they knew of the PPC is inaccurate. We're not anti-vaxxers, we're not anti-science, we're not climate change deniers. And there's a massive difference between saying I don't believe in climate change versus I don't believe a carbon tax is going to do anything other than outsource pollution to China and India. Big difference that people have to understand. And hopefully I'm going to be able to be mildly successful in doing that. The goal is to win. But I know what I'm up against. I'm up against Mark Arno. So we'll see. I'm gonna do my best.
David, thanks for coming on, man. Good luck with the campaign. I'll be following closely.
Thank you very much. And just to let everyone know, I'm not pale. This is just the lighting. I see myself in my camera. I look a little pale, but I've gotten a little sun.
All right, man. Take care.
Thank you very much.
Bye.